Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are we doing today? That was good. I am John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside. And for today, we have Sandra Faulkner visiting us. Sandra is a professor of media and communications at Bowling Green State University, where she writes, teaches, and conducts research on close relationships. She often uses poetry, creative nonfiction, and personal narratives to explore her own negotiation of identity as a parent, partner, and professor. Her book, Poetic Inquiry, Craft, Method, and Practice, won an honorable mention for the 2021 International Congress of Quantitative Inquiry Book Awards. In today's lecture, Sandra discusses the benefits of, uses for, and ways to create poetic portraits. I do always ask if you please mute your cell phone ringers and help me in welcoming Sandra Faulkner.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be talking with you all today about one of my passion projects. I also want to thank John and Lakeside for inviting me here to talk. I also need to thank the BGSU Institute for Culture and Society for their support of this research and my work with older women in this project. I'm going to begin with a poem. The Rhythm of Relationships. Life is learning to write the book without a title. Relationships have a heartbeat. Relationships are the rhythm. Relationship, a book without a title. Life is learning to write. This poem is part of a poetic portrait I crafted from an oral history interview with Lisa, who is an older woman in Wood County, Ohio. In this talk, I'm going to present a collaborative project on the life history of older women in the Wood County area. The goal of this project was to co-construct and portray the life stories of older women in multiple mediums, as well as provide public access for the work. So this work is in the BGSU archive. I have a link at the very last slide, but I also can give it to you later, so it is accessible. And the collaboration included older women in the community, myself, a colleague in my school, and the BGSU archivists who helped. And so I interviewed older women, and I recorded their stories, and I used the recordings and notes from the interviews to create poetic portraits that represented women's stories. And this talk, I will speak about the method of poetic portraiture, how to create poetic portraits, and the importance of focusing on older women. And I will be sharing 8 of the portraits from the women that I talked with. And so I'm going to set up, before I get into I'm going to share the 8 portraits, but I want to set up some of the background for this project. So I used poetic inquiry in the co-construction and presentation of older women's life stories, and I'll get to defining poetic inquiry here in a moment, because it's a really good methodology for researchers who are interested in identity, embodiment, social change. Here's the definition that I offer, right, of poetic inquiry, and this is what I spend a lot of my professional and personal life doing, is the use of poetry that's crafted from our research endeavors. And so it's either before a project analysis, as an entire project analysis, and or poetry that is part of or that constitutes an entire research project. And in this project, I use poetic transcription and poetry as representation. The use of poetry as representation in social science work has occurred for some time, so no, I didn't create it. So for example, Laura Richardson, who is a sociologist, in 1997 crafted poetry about Louisa May. And Louisa May was a participant in a study that she was doing on unwed mothers. Richardson used creative writing to, and I'll quote Richardson here, to present both a poem that was masquerading as a transcript and a transcript that was masquerading as a poem. Richardson wrote then a narrative poem using the 36 pages of transcripts from this interview, and included poetic devices such as enjambments and line breaks to try to capture the rhythmic qualities of the participants' Southern drawl. I did grow up in the Atlanta area, but I've always been accused of being a Yankee because I talk too fast. So I'm not sure that I can quite do this in the drawl, but here's a little snippet of that poem. The most important thing to say is that I grew up in the South. Being Southern shapes aspirations, shapes what you think you are and what you think you're going to be. And so this snippet of a poem, I'm arguing, is a type of poetic portrait. And poetic portraiture, then, is an art-based research method that you can use for presenting an interviewee's embodied aspects of their story in a poem or some kind of poetic form. The method entails using interviews to create poems that represent an interview's experience in verse form. You may use poetic portraiture when you want to represent interviews in a more nuanced, critical, and evocative manner. And I hope when I get to the poems that you'll agree, right, that they are evocative, in fact. So poetic transcription, which is kind of the second stage here, is a method then of turning your interviews into transcripts. And how they're different, if you've ever seen a typical transcript of an interview, you'll just see that it's like, okay, here's the interviewer, here's what they said, here's the participant, here's what they said. But in a poetic transcript, you pay attention to the line break. So it's going to look somewhat poetic on the page, right? The idea is that you're trying to mirror the speaker's rhythm. And so when you read the poetic transcript, it's as if you're transported into that speaker's diction, voice, right, et cetera. And they look like poetry, right, except that a poetic transcription is the speaker's exact words. And so you try to transform the interview into transcripts that somehow preserve that participant's speaking style and language. And one way to do this is just to highlight, and I do this, I have students do this, is just to highlight a transcript with the participant's exact words, but kind of cutting and pasting essential elements. So you might not have every single word, you might not have all the ums, the verbal disfluencies, but the idea is that you're distilling the essence of that interview. And it involves crafting transcripts in a caring and a relational manner to somehow foreground participants' stories, to create verisimilitude, and to focus really on the essence of the experience, to create coherent storylines, and again, to create evocative text. And I want to give you an example of one of the poetic transcripts I did for the participant in this story. And so this is an example of a poetic transcript from Lisa's interview. I had asked, and you see how it looks on the page, right? How would you describe yourself? I would describe myself as friendly, educated. I'm a lifelong learner, curious, resourceful, a Christian lady, a senior citizen. Did I just say that? Yes, I did, and I am. I am spirited. I think my energy, my passion, and the spirited way that I am doesn't make me think that I was born when I was, when George Washington was president. I picture other kinds of faces and people when I think senior, but that's me. Right? So this was a portion of Lisa's poetic transcript. And so a typical method then of creating poetic portraits is really a three-step process. And so first, you begin with the interviewer. And so either a researcher or a research team. I have my students do this. And you conduct an in-depth interview with a participant. In the case here, I had conducted oral histories. Second, you take the interview and then create the poetic transcript. Third, from that poetic transcript, you create a poem or a series of poems that somehow capture the spirit of the interview, the contours, the specific nuances of the interviewee's life story, all from the transcript. And the poetic portrait may include images and collage. I've done some of that with before, to create a visual and a textual snapshot of the participant's life. Gerstenblatt will say then the use of visual and textual portraits provide the opportunity to include marginalized voices and encourage a range of linguistic and non-linguistic representations to articulate authentic lived experiences. And by the way, this is this visual was one of my participants does art, and so this was some of her work. So then the question is, why this project? Why, right, oral history? I'm arguing that the poetic portraits highlight the context and influences on older women's life stories. Poetic portraiture of older women can center older women's perspectives in nuanced ways, demonstrating how their life courses met and challenged prevailing notions of relationship trajectories. The use of poetry to represent participants' stories can challenge dominant ideologies of what does it mean to be an older woman, what does it mean to age, and stereotypes by including marginalized voices and perspectives. And so why this project? The purpose was to co-construct nuanced portraits of older women in the Bowling Green area, because it was women in Wood County, Ohio, and their experiences across the life course. And so I used oral history interviews and poetic inquiry to gather their life stories and experiences. Anderson and Jack argue that oral history interviews provide an invaluable means of generating new insights about women's experiences of themselves in the world. It's a good way to gather in-depth knowledge from participants, from their own perspective. The interviews and interaction, and by the way, I'm still, because Bowling Green is a small, right, town, so I still see many of these women, and I'm Facebook friends with quite a few of them. But it provided the opportunity for them to tell their story in their own words, deciding, what was important to share, what stories they wished to emphasize, and how they wanted to present themselves. Patricia Levy talks about oral history this way and says that interview format involves a process of storytelling. The researcher guides a process where each participant narrates their stories, but when we think about what happens, right, it's a collaborative process in which the researcher and the research participant are co-creators in the knowledge-building process. Meaning it's not just out there, like waiting for us to capture it or be revealed. Rather, it emerges through the process, right, of the storytelling and the process. So really the idea for this project, if you're wondering, okay, so why were you, right, doing this project? And it was sparked by a comment that a participant had made to me in a previous poetic portrait project that I was doing. So I'd been doing similar interviews with students in some of my classes, and one participant had said to me, there are so many older women in Bowling Green that you need to capture their story. They have interesting stories, et cetera, and they need to be told. And so then I started to think about it, well, shouldn't everybody in the community have access to these? So I then conceived of this as an archive project, and so talked to some of the archivists at BGSU about this. And of course, more than one participant asked me, okay, why are you interested, right, in talking with older women? So I'm gonna tell you, I've always had intergenerational friendships with older women, always, from the time, I have fond memories of, I grew up in suburban Atlanta, and I have really fond memories of visiting my mother's women friends when we grew up, because that's what you did, right? You went and you visited, and you spent hours, right, listening, right, to their stories. So this was in the late 70s, right, and 80s. When I was a safety patrol in 7th grade, I befriended the mother of a 3rd and a 1st grader, and we had a correspondence, right, for years. And she even came to my high school graduation. And also, I'm 52, so I'm approaching older age. And by the way, 52 is like late middle age. I was like, oh my goodness. So I know, right? Right? My BFF is a gerontologist, so this is like, what's in the research literature. So the idea of collecting stories and celebrating older women in my community was really appealing on multiple levels. So then you might be saying, why older women's life stories? Older women represent a group that are marginalized and understudied. They experience intersectional discrimination at intersections of racism, sexism, ageism, ableism. Older women often report feeling ignored and silenced, and may experience invisibility compared to older men and younger women. Anecdotal evidence, and this might be one of my next research projects, right, suggests that older women often experience invisibility syndrome. Some women feel they are seen and devalued, and others feel they are not seen at all. Because we make meaning from life's experiences and identity development is a lifelong process, focusing on older women is important. So I see these oral histories as an important part of bearing witness to trauma and joy. I share these stories to break down stereotypes we have about women and aging. I hope that these stories will contribute to intergenerational conversations. Perhaps hearing a story may have someone ask an older woman in their life to tell their story. And my goal is that listening to these histories will help older women in my community, in your community, from feeling invisible, and that they will feel valued and celebrated. So I collected oral histories of 8 older women, and older women is defined as 60 plus in Wood County. And I focused on 3 things. 1, what their life was like. 2, contributions that they've made to their community. 3, how their relationship context, situations, and life circumstances influence their experiences. And 4th, how their experiences across the life course have shaped their sense of self. I used Otter AI, which is a transcription. I don't know if anyone's ever used it. It's a transcription program to generate the initial transcripts from the recorded oral histories. I then crafted poetic transcripts from the interviews after listening to the audio recording and correcting. AI does make mistakes, right? And then I used the poetic transcripts and the notes that I took, right, from our conversations to craft a poetic portrait for each participant. I'd like to share some of those now. I will say that the demographics here mirrored the demographics in Wood County. And so if you see here, 64 to 80 years old. 7 were white, 1 was African American, 1 in terms of education completed high school, 1 some college. 4 had completed an MA, 1 a PhD, and 1 an EDD. The stories that women told me were filled with pain and joy, trauma and triumph, the expected, unexpected. Their feelings about getting older and being old were not always ones of following a prescribed cultural dictate of embracing cronehood. Women talked about the importance of relationships and family, and they've represented all kinds of relational forms, from being single to widowhood, long marriages to divorce. 2 women moved to Wood County after retirement. 1 grew up in Wood County, moved away, moved back. 3 women moved there for college and then just never left. And 2 were born there and stayed. They spoke of loss from friends to romantic partners to children through death or estrangement and physical limitations. So I'd like to start with the first. So Laura, at the time of the interview, right, was a 76-year-old white woman who grew up in Oklahoma, but moved to Wood County a few years ago because her husband had ALS, and she wanted to be close to one of her sons who lived there. Laura told me that music connects the parts that were missing. She was a music teacher and a singer for years. Her story was one of overcoming disability she didn't know until that she had until she was 40 years old. She was labeled an underachiever in school. Teachers thought she was careless. And it was only in middle age that she found out that she had had brain damage from birth. She was born feet first and really should have been a cesarean section. And there was an issue with her brain hemisphere in terms of how information was passed, right, between the hemispheres. Because of her disability, school was hard, so she was only an average student in high school. But she ended up doing incredibly well on achievement tests and then ended up going to Princeton, right? This probably shocked, right, all of her teachers, to study music and earned a degree in choral directing in addition to earning an education certificate. Laura's story was all about how she wasn't supposed to have achieved what she did. And I wanted the form of her poetic portraits to look like something that it's not, right? And I knew that I had to include musical metaphors and decided that the prose poem was the best form for her story. Now, prose poetry, and you see the example up there, is a form that appears contradictory, right? Because it looks like prose, but it relies on the musicality and the techniques of poetry such as rhythm, repetition, fragmentation for meaning. A prose poem reads like poetry. And I also included musical terms and notations to show the importance of music in Laura's life. So track 1, The Underachiever Blues. Because my brain couldn't copy the rote beats of the everyday, and short-circuited thoughts got stuck in one hemisphere, teachers labeled me a big L for underachiever. They called me careless, non-caring, not careful. It almost beat the song out of me. Because school was a hemiola, I counted in 3 beats instead of 2. Each breath felt like my last. Gym class was a dogged D. G major made more sense than math tests. I measured rhythm and a different time signature, made art song out of the sharps, and held out every flat. My life is a poem put to music. Because I didn't play the piano like a singer, because I never gave up, though I was born feet first, because I created an improv number called Muddling Through, because no one gets up in the morning and decides to screw up. Music connected the parts that were missing. Music pulled together the cacophonous notes. So I have another poem in Laura's portrait, and this is track 1, Reprise. The Underachiever Changed the Key. This song is about how she changed the key. Da-da-da-dum. She sang in the chorus at Princeton U, hit the high notes she learned from her mother and grandmother 1 and grandmother 2. But let's not forget Miss Exa Hooker. Da-da-da-dum. When father died at the end of 4th grade, mother was working by 7:30, running the 1950s in high heels. Moms wantin' womanness and cited talk, not staying home, but building companies. Da-da-da-dum. Fifth grade teacher wore rows of safety pins for the just-in-case ripped hems and collars, but also used big words to sow their brains like a profusion of daffodils on the hill. Then grandmother's one mellifluous voice honeyed like syrup right into her head. Da-da-da-dum. She married a sweetheart and had 2 kids. Remember summers at grandmother's farm, beating snakes out of blackberry bushes. Bam! Bam! See my hoe? No way am I scared. Da-da-da-dum. So as you can see, she changed the key with the chorus of women you just met. Barb, at the time of the interview, was a 76-year-old woman who really does not like being old because her body can't keep up with her mind. She grew up in Walbridge, Ohio, and raised her children in Perrysburg, but has been in the Wood County area most of her life, except for when she lived in Mississippi for 5 years. Her story was one of trying to stay active, though her stamina is not like it was in the past. And so I'm going to read a little bit about, from her poetic transcript. You know, if my health was better, it would be perfect. But it comes with the territory. You do what you can do, and that is the frustrating thing about being older. That's the only thing that I hate about getting older, is the body doesn't keep up with the mind. And so that makes me very, very sad. I try very hard to stay active. I have a dog that I like to walk every day. Now, she did express satisfaction with her life, being single and enjoying family, and her hobby of living history. Barb told me that she was done with relationships because her heart had been broken, and she liked being single. She admitted that she married too early to 18 and wondered why her parents had allowed that to happen. If she had to do it all over again, she would have waited on marriage and experienced some more things on her own before settling down. Her 2 marriages and a partner she lived with for 5 years ended poorly. Barb said that she was lucky to leave her second marriage with her life. Barb has 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and regrets that her son died when they were not on good terms. Barb is proud of the fact that she was guardian of her great-granddaughter for 10 years and talked about the importance of family. Though romantic relationships were not something that were good for Barb, she lit up when she talked about how her hobby of 18th century living history and having her dog Maxie May, even though she kept telling me, I'm not a dog person, although we had to scroll through and see pictures, right, of Maxie May. But that keeps her active and not sitting on the couch watching soap operas. Barb sews 18th century women's clothes by hand using pre-made materials and hosted a yearly all-women's 18th century living history weekend from 1990 until 2023. So she had just stopped a month before we talked and has since passed right that on. She was grateful for some of the things that she's done in her life. Now, Barb's portrait I actually created as a Mobius strip. Okay, so if anybody knows what a Mobius strip, it's Mobius strip meditation on 76, and it plays on the idea of a Mobius band, a Mobius loop, which you can create right by attaching the ends of paper together and twisting. And it is a math, and you give it a half twist, and this is a mathematical form. And it can be embedded in Euclidean space in ways that give it 2 sides that represent an infinite loop. Okay, so you see that, I know you can see it up there too, and I know it's got 2 sides, right, but it is an infinite, right, loop here. So you cannot pinpoint what's clockwise and what's counterclockwise, right, on here, because it is a non-orientable surface. And I used, right, this to create Barb's portrait. And the idea here is the poem can begin and end anywhere, right, the way that it is presented here. And this made sense, right, an endless loop with no beginning or end, because it mirrored Barb's story of making sense of being 76. All points in life begin the sense-making process, right? We're constantly making sense, right, of our own experiences. And we see this in the difficulties of aging as well as the triumphs of personality and community. I could just read it out, but maybe I'll just start reading anywhere, and we'll see where we end up. Why don't we try that? And the way that it is, there's certain spaces, so it can begin anywhere, right? So at this point in my life, I like my solitude, me and my dog. I don't know if you can tell, I'm quite outgoing. I'm a people person. I don't know if you notice right off. You know when you're done, you know it's not like I ever get lonely. Oh, no, I don't ever get lonely. My brain can't wrap itself around the number 76. I can't say the word 76. 76 blows my mind, like camping in the 18th century and waking up in the 21st century with a bionic body. I'm not really happy being old, really. I'm really not happy with that at all, you know? I am living history at 76. My mind outpaces my body. Metal pieces hold the hinges together, mostly. Those golden years, I don't know, they must be coming later, I guess. If I had to do it over again, or if I could tell young girls today, don't get in a big hurry. Focus on you. Be selfish. Do things you want to do with your life. Because if I had to do it over again, I would have waited and experienced some things on my own before I settled. I sew 18th century clothes for fun, aprons, bed jackets, petticoats, always by hand, no machine, with pre-used materials like cotton quilts. My body tells me that I'm done with things like sexual orientation and relationships that tear me into strips of fabric my needle can't fix. At 76, I just live, done with the drama. I could be on the couch watching soap operas instead of winning the farmer's market bake-off 2 years in a row, two-time champ. At this point in my life, I like me, my solitude, and my dog. Okay, see, keeps going, keeps going. So the Mobius strip poem. Doris was 76-year-old and had lived and worked in Wood County and Bowling Green for 45 years after growing up in Seneca County on a dairy farm. After working in county extension, Doris retired and then became a Wood County commissioner. She's only the second female commissioner in Wood County and is also the longest serving. Doris talked about how her country roots and background in agriculture had served her well as commissioner. What was notable about her story was how she how she embodied the spirit of a public servant. She was just as busy being retired and being commissioner as when she worked in extension. Actually, she was telling me about all the things she did, and it makes me exhausted. It was really hard not to be inspired by Doris when she talked passionately about her work and navigating local politics as a woman. Her goal is to connect people with the people and the resources that they need to solve a problem. I created her portrait in couples because I thought how she talked about the need for deep listening and welcoming different viewpoints as an opportunity and a challenge to be the true meaning of dialogue. I consider the couplets to be representative dialogue and always looking for the other side of the story. Doris also never really retired, as quitting paid employment just meant that she had more time to devote herself to public service. She mentioned that perhaps more women were not in politics because of the time required. Being commissioner is supposed to be a part-time job, but Doris is always working on the weekends, walking a ditch to see what the issue is, or representing the office at a public event. She also recognized that one needed to have money and connections, right, to run for office and to run a campaign so that constituents would know who you are and that you would have support from the political party. Doris's portrait is entitled, How to Retire. Buy a Mustang convertible in a bright color the Monday after you retire. But don't let the family drive it without your permission, because this is your car after a life and county extension and being crowned Ohio Jersey Queen in 1967. Live a legacy of more than your kids, finding a way to make things happen in your community where the connections are rhizomes you rooted after chicken dinners and walks along ditches. Become the second female commissioner in this rural county, keeping the tradition of commissioners' grandfather, father, sister-in-law, by depositing heirloom seeds in the family vault in this place that reminds you of the dairy farm where you grew your milk teeth. Start sewing projects you will never finish because the shine of possibilities never dulls. Ignore the one who said they would eat you alive. Your bailiwick is being a woman in politics. Secure the respect of men and get the key to the building because agriculture and farming organize your core. Serve for 10 years and counting. Listen with a nonpartisan ear. Don't have it all figured out. Don't truly retire because a public servant never slows down. Work Saturdays and Sundays and evenings beyond the usual Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Scope out a bridge that causes problems. See difference as a challenge and an opportunity. Repeat your mantra as you drive around in parades, judge quilts at the fair, plant flowers and pull thistles. I believe you need to treat everybody the same. Say, okay, let's try it. Let's go for it. Ask yourself, what are the things you've done that are continuing on now that you're gone? Now, Melissa, at the time of our interview, was 71, and we spent a lot of our time talking about getting older and how much she hated it because she wasn't able to do things that she once could. She grew up in Bowling Green, went to Bowling Green High School, and then to Bowling Green State University, earning a degree in speech and theater. Melissa earned a master's degree in theater education and supported herself in a career in the performing arts, became a certified American Sign Language instructor-interpreter, and got involved in the theater for the deaf. This took Melissa away from Bowling Green for much of her career, though she retired back to Bowling Green in the family home. And I want to share a bit of Melissa's poetic transcript here. So I had asked, you seem to have a lot of stories where you would go in and break with what was expected. Oh, that's good, you picked up on that. Because one time I had a mentor while I was going through the interpreter training program who knew me pretty well, and she said to me, and I still think about this, Melissa, you are a trailblazer. I'm like, what do you mean by that? And she said, you tend to go in somewhere, make a trail, and then leave. And the more I think back on my careers, this is kind of what I did. And sometimes that trail stayed and became bigger and better by whoever came behind me. And sometimes it got overgrown and weeds grew. So I guess, going back to your original question, how would I describe myself? I'm not so much that now, but in my career, when I was younger, I was a trailblazer. We had a dialogue about the pros and cons of getting older. We discussed expectations that older women are supposed to age gracefully, not show anger. And aging is about loss. Melissa is the last one in her family remaining. But we talked about how getting older can also be about getting to do things that you've always wanted to do. She was the only person that was left and was estranged from a boy she adopted when he was 11. And I had pointed out that perhaps Melissa was also a trailblazer in her feelings about aging, right? That is, refusing just to accept it all with grace and invisibility because we just can't deal with women's anger. And so here's another little snippet from Melissa's poetic transcript. No, and the whole idea of aging gracefully is BS. I think we, and I say we, I'll speak for myself, I need to come to a place where I can accept the fact and move on, and maybe even embrace, you know, people have asked me, well, what's a good thing about getting old? I'm still figuring that out. I guess the good thing is that you get to a point where you just don't care, especially in retirement. You just don't care anymore about how other people think about you. It's like, I want to do this. I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna do it. So a particular acting role, or maybe it's an example of just doing something you want to do that you don't care what others think. Because Melissa is involved in theater, right, still does a lot of community theater in the Bowling Green area, I wanted her portrait to be like a production. So that's why it's in the form of a 3-act play, right? There's 3 acts. The first act sets the mood and tone of the play with a kind of interior monologue about anger and aging. The second act presents the ethnographer asking Melissa questions about her feelings of getting older. And the third act is the resolution of the play with a poem and couplets that demonstrates the sense-making Melissa and the ethnographer engaged in during their conversation. So the ethnographer and Schaefer stage the play, Getting Older. Act 1, scene 1, looking in the mirror. When I can't put my pants on without leaning on something, then I feel old. When I have to walk slowly and carefully so I don't fall, and then can't get myself up because of my knees, then I feel old. I just stopped wearing makeup. I had to look in the mirror today, and I'm thinking, geez, I look old. And then I was reminded, well, I am. Act 2, scene 2, the pros and cons of getting older. I'm really having a hard time with it. So I guess I can say the fact that I'm getting old pisses me off. Maybe we can talk about that for a little bit. Oh, no, because then I'll start crying. I hate getting old. I hate not being able to do what I used to. What's a good thing about getting old? I'm still figuring that out. I guess I just don't care anymore about how other people think about me. Here's an example of just doing something you want to do. When you're younger, you care about how you look. You care about what you're wearing. You care, you know you care. And today, it's like, I don't care. Act 3, scene 71, aging disgracefully. Make faux pas like their latest fashion trend for ladies of a certain age. Say, oh, crap, on the radio, because this is not your profession. Let a hyenic laugh cry escape, because you are a trailblazer with your pissed offness about getting old and the dance of getting your pants on without falling over. Make your anger into flint and butane to blowtorch the whole idea of aging gracefully as BS constructed by some misogynistic stage manager. Ask the ethnographer about her mother, whether there's a backdoor organization of women who don't smile when they are told to and cry that nobody told them what this was like. The loss and losing and having loss and future loss, that splinters their looks in the mirror. When others ask you what is so great about getting older, don't answer. After all, your hearing is going too. List the pros of this aging business in small print on the back of a yellowing calling card so that even progressive lenses can't decode it. You are the director of the play now, and you can direct yourself to do all the things you've always wanted to. Now, Deb moved to Bowling Green in 1970 to go to college and never thought that she would stay, but like some of the other women I talked to, right, she ended up staying in Wood County after college. And when I asked her why, she said she had an opportunity to get a master's in pop culture, and at the time she didn't want to get a job, so she got the degree. And then she got a job at BGSU in marketing and communications, where she stayed for 22 years. Deb's story was about inventing and reinventing herself, from college to pop culture to building websites and university publications and web design and content creation to opening a restaurant to ending formal employment at the age of 62. In the 8 years since then, Deb has continued to act in plays, have girls' night out, volunteer at the senior center, do part-time web design, and deliver meals to seniors. At 70, Deb has activities and work every single day of the week. I mean, she's telling me her calendar, and I was exhausted. So I wanted to portray her portrait to show the vibrant energy that Deb puts out and how she uses her passion to be involved in the community. I titled the poem Reinvention and thought of Bach's inventions, which were 2- and 3-part contrapuntal keyboard pieces. 8 of them were written in major keys, 7 written in minor keys, and they were for music education of students. And her portrait moves like an invention with contrapuntal or interwoven voices. That's what contrapuntal means, right? So reinvention. Like Bach's inventions, I play versions of myself in different keys. From Girl Scout leader to hockey mom to Wednesday desk person at the senior center. Some old people just like help figuring out the Kroger app, and some people like me too. Find me Thursdays delivering senior meals, and every week is practice with my all-girl band until we got our 27-year-old male drummer whose sex beat a discordant note, so our saxophonist quit. You may find me at Howard singing Mustang Sally, and when I was younger, see me as a French movie star in a sea of cousins, where it seems like I'm in the Aryan Brotherhood. I could never figure out why I didn't look like the other kids. Like a counterpoint to men in charge, I taught myself web design before there were templates and corporate takeovers. Now the doofus in the room can be fired for being a doof. When I was let go at 57, I started a restaurant that served big damn dinners in this small food desert town where hamburgers are the major key in salt, sugar, and heart attacks. I sold the restaurant at 62 and retired from being stuck in hard work. So, like an invention in A minor, I pick up my guitar and riff on the ballad of the difficult mother. Everybody has something to teach you, even if it's not to be like them. And hit a parallel chord when I'm not a grandmotherly grandmother, because my own kids live in cities full of hectic, getting away from the winter of flat and boring, though they return to get married on my deck in this movie set of agricultural beauty. I rewrite my life day to day, star in my own production, a contrapuntal task every day of the week. Now, Lisa is a 64-year-old African-American woman who describes herself as spiritual. She moved to Bowling Green for school in 1977 and never left. Relationships, travel, and being a lifelong learner are Lisa's core values. Near the end of our interview, Lisa really emphasized to me that participating in this project for her was very important because it was a way to ensure her legacy as an only child raised by a mother, right, who is an only child, who was raised by a grandmother who was an only child. And you can see this, and I'll give a snippet of her poetic transcript. One of the things I'd always ask, is there anything that we should know to understand your story, something we haven't talked about? Lisa said this. So this idea of legacy and this project means a lot to me. I don't have any children to pass this on to. I don't have grandchildren to pass this on to. And I have something worth passing on and something worth capturing. And I just love the idea of legacy that's wrapped up in this project. So that's important to me. That's important. And I think that that would be my final words. So her experiences in education, traveling internationally, and becoming a published author are crucial to understanding Dr. Chavers. Chavers earned her bachelor's and master's and her EDD at BGSU. And so she had always wanted to become an author and was encouraged by college professors and others, but the final push didn't come until a friend was mentioning how Lisa's stories of being ministering in Haiti were worth writing down. And so Lisa's book, which just came out in the past few years, right? So she did this in older life, have the word rhythm in the title to mirror her experiences. And you can see, two of the book covers there on the bottom. The rhythm of relationships and the rhythm of resolve. And I wrote a skinny poem, and that was a poem that I had read at the very beginning here to highlight the message in her books and the interviews, which are really the importance of relationships. So Lisa spent a lot of her time talking about that. So it was something important to highlight to show her journey to become an author and how the title of the books of our lives are really rooted right in our experience. And the skinny form, right, that you see here is a good form for showing emotion and for the compression of data, right? So you see how it looks on the page there. And I found that it really left the essence of experience as an author and why she wrote books, right? And when I thought, I guess I can reread it again, right? The rhythm of relationships. Life is learning to write the book without a title. Relationships have a heartbeat. Relationships are the rhythm. Relationship, a book without a title. Life is learning to write. Now, when I thought of a color that would describe Lisa, it was red. And the color, right, is associated with passion, sacrifice, heat, activity, love, joy, and courage. Red is also a prominent color on the cover of Lisa's books. The rhythm of red. I am senior enough now to know the cadence of relationships, how to brick a foundation in jasper stone and pour into someone. My grandparents found the courage to love for 62 years by roughing out a heart with community. I am old enough now that I write my legacy in shades of red, use the energy of saying yes to stretch the boundaries of what is by not copycatting the picture of life. My lips turn scarlet, playing the hand-me-down trumpet my uncle gifted me. My fingers tap out the color of family on the piano. My hands beat a chorus on the Ghanaian drum that centers everything relationships are. Aunt Edna's father, the Reverend John Henry, was a reddish-brown guy with real fine waves. When he showed up on the scene, respect and honor from the community. He bought a plot of land in Twinsburg in 1930 when African Americans didn't own much. 93 years later, this land reminds me to live up to my name, to do things afraid, to know a defining moment. Okay, I'm going to talk about the last two here. So this is Pam, 67, And we talked about how she had dealt with a lot of challenges in her life, both those that she invited, like going to college, and those challenges that were uninvited, like her breast cancer diagnosis and the death of her daughter. Pam has lived in Bowling Green since 1975 when she came to BGSU for school. And so here's this familiar story, right? She moved there, fell in love, and never left. She met her husband at BGSU, right? And going to college was an important goal for Pam. She was a first-generation college student. She also earned a master's in education with a specialty in reading. Pam taught 8th grade English and led Title I reading at an elementary school where she still volunteers in the 2nd grade classroom with reading. She offered advice to younger women. Don't be afraid to share your weaknesses. Be authentic, which means not conforming to what others are like, and to really listen, right, to the self. I wanted Pam's portrait to be a kind of ekphrastic poem, and so that is a poem that's written in response to a piece of artwork. And Pam, now that she's retired, spends a lot of time doing art, likes to take photographs and then sketch out using chalk pastels, right? And so because losing a child is difficult, and we spent some time talking about this and really defining, I wanted to center the poem on that loss and how one makes sense of grief. And so I chose one of Pam's flower drawings that you can see there and wrote a poem using the drawing as inspiration. And this poem is written from the artist's perspective. Flowers for Kelly. I began with a photo of a daughter, lost, inking in black-eyed Susans, the pink of wild geraniums, brushing Delilahs in lavender hues with the precision of a mother's touch, their steadfast desire to blossom when nothing else in the garden will. I work from memory when the colors can't be bright enough to capture the arc of her smile or the bruise in the place where my heart sits, discolored and heavy with grief. I don't shade in the stems at the bottom of the page to seed the roots of friendship and encourage the whisper of buds to bloom into the next chapter, the one that starts after losing a daughter. Okay, and the final portrait that I want to share with you is Jean, who's an 80-year-old white woman who's a hairstylist. And she told me she no longer has a salon or a beauty license, but she never stopped doing hair. And the interview with Jean was interesting and not like the others because we ended up, most of the rest of them were in the sound studio at BGSU. This one happened at my kitchen table. And as you can imagine, what goes on at the kitchen table, right? The dogs were barking. My husband walked in, stuff fell off the table. But it seemed like that was the setting that Jean needed to, right, tell the stories. And Jean talked to me for 4 hours. So her interview was way longer than the other ones. And I decided for this one not to craft a poetic transcript, right, of it. I went straight from the interview and my notes to writing a poem. And I wrote the poem in 4 parts. And in some ways, I'm arguing that this is kind of like a poetic transcription. Jean wanted her story, she kept telling me, I want it to be about flowers. Whoops, sorry, I meant to, there we go. I want it to be about flowers. And because flowers reminded her of her mother and her sister, right, who had been a life support for her. This poem is also the one that is most explicitly ethnographic because I included my insights with the use of the ethnographer as a narrator. And I had to relay the trauma in her life before I could get to the flowers, and you'll hear that in this poem. The details of the story needed to be told in explicit language, and I feel like seeing and hearing them makes the audience bear witness to this. And there's a rich tradition of poetry as witness. I'm thinking of Carolyn Forcher's work here. Okay, so this is in 4 parts. Jean tells the ethnographer she wants her story to be about flowers. 1, but first, you must witness her 80 years of living and working and parenting in a small rural town with roadside ditches built to mask the swamp this place once was, as if the past could be drained away. Note how she picks her thumb with her forefinger to keep herself rooted at the kitchen table, telling the ethnographer the stories that fall from her timeline as if they happened just now. Her hair looks good because she sleeps in brush rollers to represent old hairdressers. She's the last one alive who did hair at the Historical Museum and the nursing home where ladies lined up in wheelchairs, pin curls and bobby pins at the poorhouse too. The ethnographer asks about the flowers scattered on her purple shirt. Flowers, flowers, flowers. I want you to concentrate on that, how they grow out of the weeds of terrible times. 2, when your parents grew up in Hogtown in a house built after World War II with no electricity, water, or sewer lines in that part of town, with tar paper shacks marring open fields, words are a loaded gun. Poor white trash, not good enough, you'll end up PG'd. The legacy of poverty and alcoholism and the headlines of family violence are a stain that no one wants to talk about or warn you about, so you end up marrying a drunk because you're gonna love him so much, he'll never drink. Then you marry a classmate because you had 2 kids. He was gonna change your life because he was wealthy, always had 9 semi-trucks on the road, but he did not bother to come home when the first baby died. After the second baby died, he asked you at the hospital, when are you gonna quit feeling sorry for yourself? And ended the marriage with a phone call. That was that. When you have done hair for 57 years in a small town, you know the color of everyone's roots, the scars on their underbellies. You learn that friendship is not a free comb out when they show up at your place with rollers in their hair. When you mother a daughter who you thought was poisoned in the cyanide-laced Tylenol scare in the 80s, who seized so violently for 2 days, the rest of her life has been a series of tsunamis. You show up even on the days when she hates you. The pregnancy, the memory problems, being taken advantage of. What I want you to know is that none of this was her fault. When your son collapsed on a street in Ireland, dead at 55, an Army veteran who served in Operation Desert Storm, you tell the ethnographer about how you drove on unknown bridges and roads to Chicago and Georgia, though you get lost in people's houses because he needed you. 3, what you need to know. I love flowers, I love history, I love recycling. Once Aunt Daisy chopped down all the flowers in Mother's garden because she didn't know a weed from a doorknob. Mother always put the dandelions I picked in a water glass and sat them on the windowsill as if they were roses of the holler. Here's some advice for your snake plant I see dying in the corner. Take a banana peel and put it in water overnight. Drain the water and feed your houseplants all the potassium they need. You can repurpose anything. You can make a pill from 2 Gatorade caps and the neck of a bottle, plant containers from Folger cans. When my sister was dying of cancer, we talked about flowers, and I planted them in coffee cans in her yard like a greeting card. I courted my Charlie with purple petunias that I bedded in the front of his trailer. I chased him until he caught me. 46 years now, and I'm crazy in love. If it weren't for flowers, I would be a raving lunatic. 4, this starts with a line by Louise Glick. At the end of my suffering, there was a door. I was born in Hogtown at the edge of the city. What I want at the end of my story is you to know that I'm made of the tenacity of dandelions, the passion of my petunias. The point of our suffering is to be planted and replanted there in the shadows of the September sun. I was grown in the great black swamp, a tendril that leads to an open door. So that was the portraits, and I'll just leave you with, I believe that poetic inquiry kind of blurs the lines between the social sciences and the humanities. And this project really contributes to the literature on older women through an artful presentation, right, of their lives. And my hope is that others in our community will continue to add, right, to the project in the archives. So thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. I enjoyed that very much. So you said your hope is that people continue this?
Yes.
So it's open and people can, not you, they don't have to come to you. They can do it themselves to put their own life story in. How does that work?
Yeah, or I'm actually thinking about having students do some of it as well. So maybe having some of my students do some of the interviews and create some kind of portrait, right, that could be in there. So.
I'm curious if you have the questions that you use to guide the interviews.
I do. Not copied here, but there was a list of questions, and some of them were like, and
Yeah.
what's interesting is I gave them to participants ahead of time, and some of them used them to beforehand to copy some notes before the story, and some, like Jean, didn't, just talked about what they wanted to talk about. But some of the questions were about relationships kind of across a life course. So, can you tell me about, some of the questions were, what do you know about relationships now that you wish you had known when you were younger? And then so some folks would give advice. Can you think about two important people in your life and the impact that they had? And the idea was just to get them thinking about some of their experiences that they would want to talk about, and not surprise. Or I'm a relationship scholar, so I think that relationships are like the heart of everything. And so I might be a little bit arrogant. I tell students that too. I'm like, interpersonal relationships are the core of. I don't care what you do. It's everything. And so the women ended up talking about, right, their relationships to community, to other people. But if you're really curious, you can email me, and I can send you the list of questions.
Great, thank you. It's really beautiful work.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is the collection. But you also, if you just go to BGSU library and type in portraits of the Great Black Swamp, it'll pop up.
Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. Where do your students come from? Are they studying in which college, or because it's such a wonderful combination?
I am in the college. So I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences in the School of Media and Communication. And so the classes that I teach classes in interpersonal communication, in relational communication, and at the graduate level, I teach courses in qualitative research methods. So I have had students, so when you ask about the stories, I've had students do some of the poetic portraits before at the graduate level, but I know undergrads could do that as well. And the interpersonal class students come from across the university, so I'll have some aviation students. In the relational communication class that I teach, it tends to just be like communication majors. So, yeah.
Hi. This
Hel-
was amazing. I'm still processing. Hi. And invisible woman syndrome. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little? Like, I think it's definitely felt. Has it been studied?
Not so much formally, but a lot of women will then feel like they're either, like if I see you, but I'll devalue, like it doesn't matter, like you're old, right? I mean, I have a 14, almost 15-year-old daughter. Sometimes I feel that too, because I'm like, I'm talking to you, like seriously, you didn't hear me? Like, you never told me that, Mom. Are you kidding? We had a whole conversation. So sometimes I feel it, that way, like, oh my goodness, like I don't exist. And then, or other time, right, that they just feel ignored. And so there hasn't been a lot of formal study on the idea of invisibility syndrome. I think that that's a great place to start. But that was some of my thinking with this project as well is, then there's also, I think, a lot of stereotypes about, just like we tend to have a lot of stereotypes about out groups, right? So you're in one particular group and then you tend to so even older people might stereotype younger people, right, as well. I mean, it can go, different ways. And so some of the goal with this was to tell their stories and trying to use some of their voice to get rid of some of that. Like Melissa's like, yeah, I'm really not happy about being older. Like really, I'm supposed to, maybe be invisible or not complain or embrace all of this, but I'm really just not. And for me, that was a bit, I thought that was a bit refreshing. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
very
for
much.
being here. And if you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm up for conversations. I can send you. I also have a nerdy kind of research article on poetic portraits that kind of walks through the process of how I had students do it. So, yeah. And please visit the archive. Hi, Anne.
To meet you. I have a PhD in political philosophy. And
Oh, terrific.
currently head of school virtual Montessori.
Yeah.
program.
Oh, this would be great for. I've had students do this.
Poetry is my passion.
Yeah.
And so